In just a few days, and in the shadow of war, Ukrainians will go to the polls to elect a new parliament. And it will be from a different electoral map than the one we've become accustomed to in previous parliamentary elections. That old, all-encompassing orange-blue divide between a pro-European West and a pro-Moscow East, which has defined Ukrainian politics in one form or another since independence, appears to be a thing of the past. And what replaces it will largely be decided by the Ukrainian voters on Sunday. And when the dust from this conflict finally settles, it's going to be a very different Ukraine than the one we've become accustomed to as well. Hello from our broadcast headquarters in Prague, and welcome to RLive. My name is Brian Whitmore, Senior Europe Editor and host of RFE's Power Vertical podcast. Joining me from Kiev is investigative journalist Natalia Sedletska, host of the television program Schemes, Corruption in Detail. Welcome, Natalia.
Hello.
And joining us from Kiev also is Irina Shvets of the election monitoring civic group Opora. Welcome, Irina.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And joining us from Washington, D.C. and joining us from Toronto is Taras Kuzio of the University of Alberta's Canadian Institute for Ukrainian Studies. Welcome, Taras.
Hi.
And sorry for the mix-up on your location.
No, I deliberately make it confusing.
Okay. Well, this is an election that is taking place in a country that is, in effect, at war. So before we get to the meat of our discussion, I wanted to clarify for our viewers just what we're dealing with here. Where will casting a ballot be difficult? Where will it effectively be impossible? And Irina, I know you do this kind of stuff for a living, so if you would, please spell it out for us, how this is going to play out in places like Donbass and Crimea.
Well, yes, indeed. Today in the morning, I got an update from our long-term observers who are working and who are looking into the situation in Donbass, in both Luhansk and Donetsk regions. And I would say that the biggest challenge for Ukraine right now is that people in those regions, not of them will be able to vote. I would say that approximately 45% of all voters in Donbass, they will not be able to come to the polling stations on the election day and cast a vote. For the time being, there is a possibility to hold elections only in 8 out of 25 districts in Donetsk Oblast and in 5 out of 11 districts in Luhansk Oblast. However, in those districts who are controlled by the Ukrainian army, people, they are just afraid to go and vote to the polling stations. People who are working in district election commissions and precinct election commissions, they are also terrified and they are intimidated by the terrorists of Luhansk People's Republic, and of course they are also afraid to work since those terrorists, they do not recognize the elections as legal. On the other hand, it is good news that Ukrainian soldiers who are staying there and who are fighting within the anti-terroristic operation, they will be able to vote because the Central Election Commission guaranteed them the right to exercise their right to vote, and they will be able to vote in the neighborhood in the nearby polling stations. It is also interesting that if we speak about the election campaigning on the East, I should say that it is much more or less similar to the one that we observe in other regions of Ukraine. So we can speak about the vote bribing, about providing goods, food, free transport, or even propositions of money voters, and a lot of candidates use those techniques in the eastern part of Ukraine.
So this is the vote buying is a problem more in the eastern part than in the other parts of the country, yeah?
Yeah, it is the problems, but it is interesting that they are similar for the whole country of Ukraine. In the east, when we are still fighting, and also in the other regions. But of course, the situation in the east is very complicated, and of our prognosis is that half of the people who are will not be able to vote. But I would not say that also in those districts which are Ukrainian and controlled by the Ukrainian army, whether all of the people will also come to the polling stations and cast a vote. I think that we'll have a turnout at approximately not higher than 30% of voters who will come and vote.
In those districts, but not Ukraine-wide.
Yeah.
What about Crimea?
In those districts.
What about Crimea? What about people in Crimea who may want to vote? I mean, there's a lot of ethnic Ukrainians, there are ethnic Ukrainians in Crimea. There's Tatars. Mm-hmm. If you want to vote in Crimea, what are your options? Do you have any?
Yeah, there is an option and there is a procedure. It is also stated by the Central Election Commission and by the State Voters Register Maintenance Body, and it is foreseen that those people who are living in Crimea and also who are living in the eastern part of Ukraine and will not be able to vote, they have the right to change their voting address. It means that they have to come to the neighborhood districts, neighborhood oblasts, and say, like, to go to the State Voters Maintenance Body and state that they would like to vote. And just in a few seconds, they will have the ID card indicating that they will have the chance to vote at another polling station in safe area. For instance, those people who are living in Crimea and who'd like to vote and who still have Ukrainian passports, they will be able to do this in Odessa or in Kherson oblasts.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's a similar system that was used in the presidential election then. Now,
yeah, it is.
Yeah. Natalia and Taras, I wanted to get your thoughts on this. I mean, does so many people not being able to vote, will this in any way diminish the legitimacy of this election? Natalia, why don't you tackle that first?
I just wanted to summarize that we expect about from 450 seats in Parliament, we expect a little more than 400 seats MPs to be elected with these elections. And what President Poroshenko said, that after anti-terrorist operation, he has a hope to conduct elections on those regions where it was impossible now.
Mm. Do you think that the legitimacy will in any way be harmed by the fact that significant amounts of people will not be able to vote, even though through no fault of the Ukrainian authorities, but nevertheless will not be able to vote?
Well, I mean, I'm not very optimistic that in the same way as President Poroshenko, that somehow elections will be held in the regions controlled by the separatists. I mean, I think what's happening de facto is that the ceasefire line is going to become the new border between Ukraine and Russia. And I think if you held a referendum in Ukraine today, most people would say, to hell with that region. Let's accept this as a new de facto border with Ukraine. That's assuming, of course, President Putin doesn't try any more antics vis-a-vis sort of Mariupol. But I don't think it will harm the overall legitimacy of the elections. Turnout in East Ukraine was always lower. Far lower, in fact, than in Western and Central Ukraine because of weaker political contacts, weaker civil society, etc. And most people will be blaming the separatists, as we heard from the first speaker, for striking fear into the hearts of people for not voting. So they won't really be blaming. I don't think people in Kiev or people in the West will be blaming the Ukrainians for this.
Right. Well, let's stick with you on that point, Taras. You say you expect this to be the new border, or perhaps even a frozen conflict zone. But even if that's the case, and even if it's not the case, the old orange-blue divide, as I noted in my intro, seems to be gone. And this thing is, in one form or another, even before it was called the orange-blue divide, has defined Ukrainian elections for a long time now. If, in fact, we're talking about a Ukrainian electoral map that does not include Crimea, does not include the parts that are occupied by the separatists, that's one thing. And if you could push this even further, though, I saw a poll recently of Kharkiv and Odessa oblasts, two of the most Russian-speaking oblasts in Ukraine, and the numbers were just pretty eye-popping. First of all, 75% of the people in these two districts, according to the poll, intend to vote. 87% of them want their regions to remain part of Ukraine. More strong majorities have negative attitudes towards Mr. Putin, and strong majorities say their opinion of Russia in the last year has gotten worse. This suggests, again, the old orange-blue divide is going to be a thing of the past, because the Russians that remain in Ukraine are not going to be voting like the ethnic Russians did in the past. If the orange-blue divide is going, what's going to replace it, since this was such an all-encompassing thing in Ukrainian politics for so long? How do you see that?
Well, especially in presidential elections, yes. Ukraine went to the brink in sort of 94, to some extent 2004, and to some extent 2010. I was just in Kharkiv and Odessa in October, so for me it is fascinating to talk about these regions. I think Putin expected the eight Russian-speaking regions of eastern southern Ukraine, so-called New Russia, to support him, and in fact only two did. Donetsk, Luhansk, and even there he only captured a third of that territory. Ukraine's put up a damn good fight, even though the armed forces are in disarray. So I think that if you look at those regions, the two regions in the springtime which were possibly going one way or the other, i.e. towards Russia or Ukraine, were actually Kharkiv and Odessa. Kharkiv in particular had conflict because it's only 40 kilometers to the Russian border, so Putin was sending in so-called political tourists who were trying to create mayhem. Then, of course, in May in Odessa you had the fire in the trade union building which killed 42 people, and prior to that shootings of Ukrainians. So what happened there was they tried in Odessa and Kharkiv, but they failed. The Ukrainians mobilized. And so we can thank Putin for creating a new patriotic Russian-speaking Ukraine, who were previously were kind of amorphous, didn't want to take sides. But as we know from Yugoslavia and elsewhere, during conflict times, people have to take sides. This has been a problem with Rinat Akhmetov in Donetsk. He refused to take a side, unlike Kolomoisky in Dnipropetrovsk. And in Odessa and Kharkiv, pro-Ukrainians mobilized, including, by the way, ultra football fans. Mm-hmm. And to coin this fantastic song, which I won't say on air, in Kharkiv, and they overcame the smaller extremist pro-Russian groups. In the other regions, Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and Mykolaiv outside the port area, there was always more a pro-Ukrainian presence than a pro-Russian. So it really was Donbass and Kharkiv and Odessa where you had that kind of pro-Soviet. There are many reasons which we could go into why the Ukrainians succeeded there, but Putin failed his objective. And I think now it's really too late. If Putin tries to do a full-scale attempt to create a land bridge through Mariupol, he will have to commit, I don't know, tens of thousands of troops. Ukrainians will put up a massive, strong resistance. And I don't think it'll be that easy. He should have tried this really more in the springtime. I think it's now he's missed the opportunity. I think, yes, the old blue-orange divide has gone, but and we can see that of the 6 or so political forces that are coming into parliament, only one is the old guard opposition bloc, the former regents people. But that doesn't tell us the full story. And this is where I'd like my colleagues from Kiev really to talk about, because of the 6 political forces, only one is a new face. Samo Pomich, the mayor of Lviv, self-help, whereas the others are all kind of rebranded old faces, whether it's Yatsenyuk, Poroshenko, Tymoshenko. So one wonders, yes, the Communist Party are not coming into parliament. That'll be the first. Svoboda actually are not likely to enter as well, the far right. So despite propaganda in Russia that Ukraine is run by fascists, that's not the case.
Sector's polling at like 1%, if I'm not mistaken, right?
If that, and Svoboda is not even close to the 4-5% threshold. The only two close to that threshold that may just tip over are Strong Ukraine, Serhiy Tihipko, and Gritsenko Civic Initiative. But with these new sort of more orange sort of political forces coming to parliament, are they going to do the job of what Ukrainians at the grassroots level want, which is a Europeanization of Ukraine and a fight against corruption? And that's where I think the jury's still out.
Yeah, no, I'm seeing a lot of interesting stuff on social media about how Odessa and Kharkiv are now the two freest Russian-speaking cities in the world. What I'm really interested in seeing come Sunday is how these two freest Russian-speaking cities in the world and other Russian-speaking cities like Zaporizhia, Dnipropetrovsk, and others, who they vote for, because these are regions that did vote for the Party of Regions in the past. These are regions that did vote for Viktor Yanukovych in the previous presidential election. How are they going to vote? Because that's going to be very interesting. What's going to replace the blue side of the orange-blue divide? Natalia, do you have any thoughts on that? You're on the ground there in Kyiv. What do you see?
No, I'm sure that the reputation of Party of Regions was really fall down. That's why the opposition bloc is really on the verge, and another political force called Strong Ukraine is unlikely to be elected to the parliament. But I wanted to mention something about new face. Taras told that only one political power is going to be elected, having kind of new faces in the politics, and the explanation why is it so difficult for new politicians to come to the parliament is because previous MPs didn't change the rules. You know, the barrier is too high. So for Ukraine to renew all political system, the barrier has to be much lower than 5%. So what new politicians had to do, they joined big political parties. And that means that now they are not that independent as they could be if they were having their own new political party. And I also wanted to add that the very big problem is that the winners will be elected not because, again, of their political parties' programs, but because of personal leaders' ratings. And this is the answer of Taras' question, if they are going to be pro-European, anti-corruption, and so on. People in Ukraine vote for leaders, not for programs.
No, I saw, again, this poll I just looked at from Odessa and Kharkiv. The who are you going to vote for question was very interesting, because the vast majority, it was like over 70%, was undecided. But the top two parties, this was very interesting, each with about 7.5% or so. It was the bloc of Petro Poroshenko, and then in second place was Solidarnost, which, if I'm not mistaken, is the previous name of the bloc of Petro Poroshenko, suggesting that 15% are going to vote for the president's party, but the remainder are undecided, and it's really a big mystery to me. I'm really, really curious to see how these loyal to Ukraine but Russian-speaking regions are gonna behave in this election, because I think that's going to tell a lot about what this new electoral map that replaces the orange-blue divide is gonna look like. Irina, I know you do election monitoring. Do you have any thoughts on this aspect of it?
I think that those voters who will be casting their votes in Odessa and Kharkiv, they will be voting the same way as the whole Ukraine. So they will be mostly voting for Poroshenko or for the People's Front. So there will be no surprises. You know, I would not say that they will vote for the oppositional bloc or for some Strong Ukraine of Serhiy Tihip or other party. But on the other hand, again, if we speak about those about the eastern part of Ukraine, this was really a surprise for me. But people still will vote for the oppositional bloc there and for the Strong Ukraine. And also they support those candidates who are nominated by the oppositional bloc and by the Strong Ukraine. So I speak about the Donetsk and about Luhansk regions. So those districts, those part of Ukraine, they still support the so-called Party of Regions satellite parties.
So we could see, I mean, not a Party of Regions resurrection, but at least a Party of Regions presence in the new parliament.
Yeah, but it's going to be 8%.
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to go back to you, Tarasa, where you were saying it's basically a lot of recycled and rebranded old names. But one of the things, we just did a piece a couple of days ago here from one of our correspondents in Kyiv about a lot of the heroes of the Euromaidan, previous political unknowns and still political novices, running on a lot of the party lists of the old stalwarts. Some are running with Yatsenyuk's list, some are running on Poroshenko's list. And you got to wonder if a lot of them get into the parliament, and I suspect in this environment they will. What chance do they have to kind of remake things, regardless of what party they brand themselves as? They're going to come in as the heroes of the Euromaidan, or are they going to get co-opted by the old system? What do you think?
Well, I mean, just quickly on the Kharkiv and Odessa, we have to remember that Ukraine wasn't always dominated by the Party of Regions. There was a life before the Party of Regions, in some ways, and the party and in the 90s and throughout most of the Kuchma era, Kharkiv and Odessa were typical towns dominated by the ex-Komsomol, sort of centrist, middle-class, liberal parties. Party of Regions became prominent after the Orange Revolution and monopolized power in eastern southern Ukraine. But prior to that, there was a lot of pluralism in eastern southern Ukraine with these so-called centrist parties. And I think we're going to return to that. Kharkiv and Dnipropetrovsk were two major cities in Soviet Ukraine that produced in the 90s the ex-Komsomol parties such as the NDP. But on the question of these new faces, as it were, joining the old political parties, I think only two options can really happen. Yes, they could become corrupted, they could go native, as it were, or they could do what Vakarchuk, the lead singer of Okean Yelzy, did in 2006 and say, to hell with the Ukrainian parliament, I can't get anything done here, and just leave. It's one of those two things. I think that because...
Is not a third variant that they can really enact real change?
Well, I think that some people are going to bang their heads, like, say, the Ministry of Economics in the government, or Tatiana Chornovol, head of the Anti-Corruption Bureau, and then they're going to go. I think that these political parties are not parties, let's remember, so they're going to probably disintegrate once they're inside Parliament, and I bet there'll be a lot of fluidity amongst these people, and people will go into these, will join these to get into Parliament, but I don't think they're going to be very loyal to the leader of those political forces.
So the factions you form in Parliament are not necessarily tied to the party you're elected in. You're a free agent once you're in Parliament. Is that how it works?
Well, it was. I think I should ask my Kiev colleagues. It was under Yanukovych, because that's how they did political corruption. They bribed people to join the authorities. But they may have tightened up the rules since.
If you quit your fraction on your own, then you can be excluded from the parliament by the head of the party, by the management of the party. That means that you can't really change your fraction, but you can create deputy groups within the parliament with others from other fractions. That's the plan of those newcomers to parliament who are now coming to parliament with different parties. You know, these young politicians, but they are planning to have their own group, even if they will be with different fractions.
There's another thing I wanted to touch on, and this is something that jumped out at me as I've read analysis after analysis of what to expect in this election, and the expectation is to have this large pro-European majority, regardless of what the composition and the parties are. It's going to be a large kind of pro-European integration majority. And what strikes me is that basically, for the first time since independence, not just the orange-blue divide is gone in whatever form, but this existential question that seems to be debated in every single Ukrainian election and never completely resolved. It seems to be resolved now, and it's a question most countries don't have to face. Should we continue to be an independent country, or should we be a colony of another country? To put it in its crudest possible form. That question is off the ballot now, so to speak. Speaking metaphorically, of course, but this has been kind of on the ballot in every Ukrainian election. Should we be a vassal to Russia, or should we be an independent European country? That's off the ballot. Is that the first step towards Ukraine becoming a truly European country? And what is going to be the divide? Is it going to be a left-right divide? Is it going to be a regional divide? Because politics has to be about arguing about something. That's the nature of politics. Taras, you're the political scientist. You want to tackle that?
Well, I think that it's a bit too early, but I'm sure in a few years' time people in Kiev have already joked to me that they should put a monument up to Vladimir Putin for helping to consolidate Ukraine as a nation and to helping to basically expand. If you think about the late 1980s, the movement for independence was primarily West Ukraine. Then by the Orange Revolution, it moved to central Ukraine. Now with the Euromaidan, it's moved to East Ukraine. And so, yes, it's sort of a long process of Soviet disintegration. You've had the destruction of 500 Lenin monuments in the last year or so. What will the new divide be? It's difficult to say because there are no real political parties in Ukraine. And as Irina said, there are political programs that parties propose in elections are never fulfilled. They're just virtual programs. So I think it's still too early to say how the divide will happen. It certainly won't be, as you say, the old, pro-Russian, pro-European.
Question.
But it will be. I think Poroshenko is going to be in for a very rough time in the next 2 years because expectations in society are at fever point.
Natalia, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I wanted to add that I wouldn't say that the division is over, and we don't have to underestimate those numbers of people coming to parliament who are more or less, let's call them Russian agents. And what been told by Mr. Ilarionov, the expert, he said that Putin's plan is to get Poroshenko within the next year out of power. And the plan is to do this with the parliament, with help of parliament. Many politicians coming to this parliament are not that, clear, and because of the system, which is designed as we call it major proportional. The problem is that because of bribes on the elections and other dishonest instruments, corrupted people and people like agents of Russia are likely to join the parliament. So I wouldn't underestimate this risk of division within the next parliament.
One has to wonder, and I guess I'll go to you, Irina, with this. I mean, one has to wonder and I agree with you, Natalia. This is going to stay, but this is going to stay there to a degree. But it's not going to be the all-encompassing, or I don't expect it to be the all-encompassing thing that it's been till now. In the past, politicians could hide behind this orange-blue divide, in a sense. And the real questions weren't really debated because they were overshadowed by this all-encompassing, should we be a vassal of Russia or should we be an independent European country? With that gone to a degree, politicians won't have something to hide behind anymore. And they're going to have to face up to issues. And as politics becomes more European in Ukraine, so to speak, well, European parliaments and politicians fight every single day about taxes and spending and how to organize public affairs. Ukraine's heading into some very difficult economic times, and these usually produce in the West the fiercest political debates between left and right. Irina, what do you think? Is this going to force the political system to face the real issues now?
No, recently I was analyzing the programs of the political parties and MP candidates who are running in different districts of Ukraine. And I should say that they are all speaking about the same things: reforms, peace, lustration, fight to corruption, strong local self-government. So these are the top 5 themes discussed by all politicians. But the bad thing is no one of them are saying how they should do this. No one is proposing a real instrument or a real tool to be used in order to produce or to introduce some reforms. No one of them is speaking about what will be they doing, not promising, but what are the steps that they will take in order to do this reform. And of course, I totally agree with Natalia, who was speaking about the leaders and the support to, for instance, of Lyashko Radical Party. Yeah, no one does not know even the top 5 leaders of his party, the voters just know Lyashko and that's it. It is the same issue even with Tymoshenko, you know, because now there are her videos running on the broadcasting on TV, and she's presenting her new team, but no one knows. Like, who knows these new young faces? Yeah, because she's just talking about them, but no one really expects that they will come and change everything, because there is no program they propose to the voters. So I think that the main challenge for us right now is really to build the political parties and political environment that would be able to propose some reforms. Of course, there is such a core, yeah, of this package, reanimation package of reforms, and this activists, civic activists, who are trying to join their efforts and to come up with some positions and some really good draft laws. But we will have a look, and we really hope that something will work out of this, because it will be really a very nice precedent if that works.
Well, if you believe, as I do, that Ukrainian society and Ukrainian civil society in particular is light years ahead of its political class, and that is obvious when you look. It's one of the things that becomes very obvious when you look at Ukraine. Its civil society is much more mature than its political system. And if you believe, as I do, that Ukraine is fundamentally changed and turned a very important corner in the last year, then one would expect, if you take those, you take those two assumptions, one would expect that there is going to be incredible pressure on the political elite to get something done now and stop hiding behind platitudes. Taras, am I a foolish optimist, or am I onto something?
No, I think you're absolutely right that there's going to be a clash between those who are very cynical, and cynicism is very common in that part of the world, who say it's business as usual despite the Euromaidan and everything, and those who say who want change. And in particular, Poroshenko has to put some people in jail, let's be very blunt, from the old regime. And he has to put people in jail who committed the murders on the Euromaidan. If he doesn't do that, he's finished within 1 to 2 years. People will demand accountability of their elites. One of the major problems in Ukrainian society has always been the lack of accountability of ruling elites. That has to be stopped. That's what Ukrainians want. They want a real, not a virtual fight against corruption, especially at the high levels of Ukrainian society. And that means greater transparency. And the sad thing is that the lack of transparency isn't just Lyashko, who's funded by the gas lobby, his party, but he has the same political consultants as the opposition bloc, but it's also with the Popular Front, with the Prime Minister Yatsenyuk, who has very little transparency in his political force. So yes, there's going to be, I think, that clash, and this is a more dangerous situation than before, because there are weapons in Ukraine now. There are people angry at the front line about the need for changes. They've lost their comrades, and the corruption is there on the front line, where people who volunteer to join the National Guard have to ridiculously buy their own equipment. So I think that is something that's going to be bubbling away, and is going to be something that will create friction, certainly.
I want to talk about Lyashko in a minute, Taras, but you actually touched on a very important point that I wanted to kind of follow up on. You mentioned how Lyashko's fund is the gas lobby, and a lot of the corruption is tied to Russia in a lot of ways in Ukraine. Has anybody made the connection explicitly between corruption and national security? In other words, corruption as a national security instrument, because this is one of the ways that Russia operates, and I've been watching this for a long time in former Soviet republics, is something called elite capture. By spreading corruption, it creates elites in foreign countries that are beholden to Moscow in one way or the other, and it's a big tool of influence. So corruption isn't just a good government issue. It is a good government issue, but not just one. It's also a national security issue. Are people making this connection?
I'm not sure. Edward Lucas, by the way, in his book Deception, says that Russia's biggest export isn't energy, it's corruption. To Western Europe as well.
Right there.
To Western Europe as well, not just to Ukraine. I'm not sure. I think they are to some extent, because Ukraine basically nearly ceased to exist this year as a consequence of corruption. Yanukovych led the country and left it bankrupt. Let's be quite brutal. He corporate raided the budget and the state. And the Ukrainian armed forces on their own would have not been able to fight the Russian-backed insurgents. It was only because of Ukrainian volunteers, backed by civil society, by the way, in Kharkiv and Dnipropetrovsk in particular, as well as Kiev, who volunteered and joined the National Guard and actually practically defeated the separatists until Russia's invasion. So yes, I think that corruption is a national security concern. I think it's trickled down a little bit, but I'm not sure it's trickled down completely, because I still think, like Irina and others have said, that there's still a lot of people coming into Parliament or outside Parliament who think it's going to be business as usual.
Okay, well, I wanted to go to Lyashko before I forget, because this is the rise of populism is quite important. And Lyashko is polling quite well right now, if I can believe the polls I'm seeing. I saw him running second in some polls, if I'm not mistaken. What is behind this phenomenon? I mean, is it his antics? Is he the Ukrainian version of Vladimir Zhirinovsky, but he's just a front for something else? Or is he tapping into something, a genuine frustration in society? Natalia, what explains the Lyashko phenomenon?
There are many proofs that behind the party of Lyashko, as Taras said, gas lobbyist is. And one of the improvements is that the main consultant of Igor Lyashko party is the consultant of opposition bloc, the ex-party of region. Even if the rhetoric of these parties are totally different, this is pre-election rhetoric, and we might only imagine how they will act in parliament. So this is also a question about national security. And another improvement is that he is very often guest on the biggest television channel of Ukraine called Inter, and this channel belongs to gas oligarch Mr. Firtash, who was also financing the party of regions, especially this block of gas politicians. And also the head of stab of ex-official, the head of office of Lyashko, the head of party, let's say, who is ruling the elections, not the party, but who is ruling the elections, is also the ex-official close to Yanukovych. His name is Vladislav Kaskiv, and he is now ruling the campaign of Lyashko. This is really shows everything about this party, I would say. But you know, a lot of Ukrainians simply don't know about that, especially in small villages. That's how this result is appearing.
So people are supporting parties like Lyashko's Radical Party because they think it's something new and it's something that's not politics as usual. That's something that is pro-Ukrainian. Let's face it, because his antics are certainly suggest that. But in reality, he might be a stalking horse for the other side. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, this is a very cynical, situation within Ukrainian politics.
Mm-hmm. Irina, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is true, and it's really weird, and it's interesting because Lyashko Radical Party, they mainly playing on the same electoral field as Svoboda, as Right Sector, and other far-right parties. But I would not overestimate their support, because they started with voter support of 30%, I think, sometime in August or in early September, and now it went down to 12 or 15. So it is going down, and it's a good signal.
Okay, Taras, you want to add something there?
Yeah. Just I was just stunned. I didn't realize that who the head of Lyashko's election campaign is. I don't know whether your listeners know who this guy is. Vladislav Kaskiv was the head of the yellow wing of Pora in 2004 during the Orange Revolution, but in 2010 he defected to Yanukovych and became a government minister. He's a West Ukrainian, but of course very cynical. Opora emerged from the good wing of Pora, the black wing of Pora, which didn't sell itself out. So it's fascinating that the same guys have been recycled, and the fact that Kaskiv's there is a sign that this is old gas money, as it were, I think that it's going to be, you have them in every country. Serbia, the Radical Party; Russia, Zhirinovsky's party. They're so-called loyal nationalists. But I think that I agree with Irina that the real support on Sunday will probably be lower than the opinion polls, because people say they want to support Radical Party as a protest in opinion polls, and then in reality don't want to throw their vote away. And then there are other parties who usually get low ratings in polls but do better on election day. So polls give us a glimpse but not the full picture.
And polling in this environment has to be extremely difficult as well. Another thing I wanted to touch on was the Donbass oligarchs. What role are they going to play? Taras, you mentioned early on about how Akhmetov has been sitting on the fence throughout this entire conflict, but these were people who were the kingmakers in the old Ukraine. Are they still going to be able to play a kingmaker's role in the new Ukraine? Will new oligarchs replace them? How do you see people like Akhmetov and Pinchuk playing out in this election? And after it, where do you see their influence? And how strong do you see their influence? Do you see it continuing?
Well, this is going to be the question again of dealing with the very close links between business and politics. Will Poroshenko, himself a product of the rise of oligarchs and himself an oligarch, will he be able to tackle this issue? After all, we shouldn't forget that Petro Poroshenko was one of the founders of the party regions in 2000, 14 years ago. Everybody forgets this. I think that the Donetsk oligarchs like Akhmetov are pretty finished. There was even a report in today's media that some of their assets are under investigation in Europe. Akhmetov does no longer has a political krisha, a political protection from anybody in Kiev. This is the first time in his life that he's had this, not had this. So I think he missed the boat. He's hated by both sides, by the Kiev side and by the separatists, because he refused to really take sides. Kolomoisky, of course, has come out of this very well. When I was in East Ukraine in October, they joked that an Armenian and a Jew saved East Ukraine, Avakov and Kolomoisky. But Pinchuk's been very quiet, but I don't think he's under any threat. He was always the most advanced of the oligarchs, shall we say, and he's very close to Tihibko if Tihibko's party gets in strong Ukraine. But I think the days of the really big oligarch capture of Ukraine are gone. It really depends on how, and this relates to corruption and the closeness of business to politics. How is Poroshenko going to deal with that fact? Because both Ukrainians and the West say you need to separate business and politics, and it should no longer be business as usual.
So that should be good news, Natalia. Then, if the rule of the oligarchs is over, is that good news, or are you not so optimistic as Taras on this?
Unfortunately, I'm not so optimistic, and of course, Akhmetov is losing his wealth and money and influence. But it's not a question of Akhmetov or other oligarchs. It's a question of all oligarchs and all oligarch system in Ukraine. And unfortunately, I think that it's still here. On this political election and this election campaign, we still didn't know, and it wasn't transparent what oligarch finances what party. They still are not open with that, and journalistic investigations are proving that many MPs will be put in the parliament by oligarchs with their money. That means that oligarchs they control media, they still control so many factories and the major part of the economy in Ukraine, and they dictate and they will dictate in the next parliament laws, adoption of laws in favor to them. And I'm sure, like as a journalist, I think that after fighting with the most corrupted regime, I mean previous regime of Yanukovych, our main challenge now, as for Ukrainians, is to fight this politically oligarchian system in Ukraine. This is now the most evil in Ukraine after Russian aggression. And I also would add that corrupted people within the authorities are the best partners for oligarchs. So this is where corruption can continue if we still have this oligarchian system.
No, and I have to agree that that is one of the key things, and this is a road into corruption, which is also, again, as we pointed out before, a national security issue. Let's face it. This is one of Russia's best weapons in Ukraine is corruption, and as elsewhere.
Imagine if the main electricity plants are owned by oligarchs who are more or less controlled by Russia. How can we say about national security?
Yeah. Well, before we wrap up, I wanted to get your ideas of what you expect to happen Sunday. I mean, there was a time in this campaign when people were talking about a constitutional majority for the Poroshenko bloc. People aren't talking about that so much anymore, but we're talking about a strong pro-European majority. Natalia, what do you expect to see happen on Sunday? What kind of a parliament do you expect to pop out of this? How big of a majority will the president get? How many allies will he have in parliament?
You know, even few months ago, there was a perspective, there was a hope within the Poroshenko's party that they can even get the majority of the seats. But what we see now with the latest polls is that they will get only up to 30% of seats in the parliament. I mean, Poroshenko's party. So definitely they will not create the majority by themselves. They will have to have a coalition with others, and there will be democratic parties to join to coalition with the Poroshenko. But I will say that major conflicts will be happening on the local level, on the regions, and where the rivals are with the previous regime and newcomers. So I think that the most conflicts will be in the regions.
Irina, we lost you for a minute, but I'm very happy to see that you're back. Can you hear me? Yeah. I don't have a voice in Irina. So same question to you, Taras. What do you expect to see? What do you expect to see on Sunday? What kind of a parliament do you expect to emerge from all of this?
Well, we're going to have at least probably 2/3 of Parliament, which will be the Poroshenko bloc, Popular Front, Yatsenyuk, and Batkivshina at the very least, and Samopomich, self-help from Lviv. Those four together are going to have a constitutional majority, probably. And they, when I was in Kiev in October, Poroshenko's people told me that their natural partner would be Yatsenyuk. And that if they can't create a coalition themselves, then they'll go with Yatsenyuk and they'll keep him as prime minister. If they can do it themselves, they'd appoint their own prime minister. So it's likely to be Yatsenyuk still prime minister, coalition of the Popular Front and the Poroshenko bloc. But both of them are virtual parties. There's no structural substance in either of them. And then the natural allies should be the middle class party Samopomich, which is certainly a party of the new Western Ukraine or Western Central Ukraine middle class, maybe Silna Ukraina, and Batkivshina kind of not in opposition but not with them as well, somewhere like that. And of course then shouting from the sidelines will be the opposition bloc, but they are only getting about 8%, and remember, compared to Party of Regions, which got 33%.
And Lyashko?
Sorry?
And the Radicals?
Well, the Radicals are going to be just, I think, clowns like Zhirinovsky. They're going to be, selling their votes, depending on how many people they have. But they're not going to be, productive contributors to legislation and to the Europeanization of Ukraine, which is really more your question. So they're going to be more disruptors, but I suspect that also people will join them just to get into parliament, and then we'll probably leave as well. So, we've had that in the past with parties being co-opted. But we're going to have for the first time, at least, yes, a constitutional majority of 2/3 of parliament, which is pro-European.
Does that mean that there won't be any of the kind of nonsense we've seen in the past, the blocking of the podium and the paralyzing of the work of the parliament? Is that also going to go by the way of the orange-blue divide, or are we still going to see those kind of antics in parliament?
Oh, it's good fun. I don't know. What do my colleagues say? Probably it will still continue because I think there's quite a low professionalism amongst the political and business class in Ukraine. Very few of them speak English, by the way. The level of political culture is still relatively low because of the Soviet inheritance of that region of the world. So I'm sure that that's going to continue, and Lyashko will be on hand to help that happen.
Okay, any last words before Natalia or Irina? Irina, can you hear me? No.
Just a voice. Okay.
Okay. Natalia, any last words any last thoughts before we wrap it up? Any reaction to what Taras just said?
Yeah, I totally agree with Taras. He has the latest results of polls, so that's what's gonna likely happen. 6 parties are gonna join the next parliament, and this is anyway better than previous one.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be incredible that Putin's big adventure in Ukraine has totally backfired. I mean, completely.
Well, in this sense, yes, I've seen a popular thing I've been hearing people saying is Putin may have grabbed Crimea, but he's lost Ukraine probably forever. Just one more try to get Irina in here, if we have sound on her. Irina, can you hear me? Unfortunately, we've lost Irina, but she is with us. She is with us in spirit. And thank you for being with us. And on that note, we'll wrap it up. That's just about all we have time for today. But stay tuned to RFRL's Ukrainian Services' excellent coverage of this very important story. This has been RFRL Live. My name is Brian Whitmore, Senior Europe Editor at RFRL and host of the Power Vertical podcast. Joining me from Kyiv has been investigative journalist Natalia Sedletska, host of the television program Schemes, Corruption, and Detail. Also joining us from Kyiv has been Irina Shvets of the election monitoring group Opora, and joining us from Toronto has been Taras Kuzio of the University of Alberta's Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies. Thank you all for a fascinating discussion.
Thank you.